This podcast is made possible through listener contributions to the ETV Endowment of South Carolina.
And the Florence County Museum, announcing Fighters for Freedom, William H. Johnson Picturing Justice, organized by the Smithsonian American Art Museum with support from Art Bridges. Johnson's evocative work is on view now through August 10th. FlocoMuseum.org.
From South Carolina Public Radio, this is Walter Edgar's Journal. I'm Alfred Turner, welcoming you to our podcast about South Carolina culture and history with a nod to all things Southern. This week, Walter, Edgar, and I will be doing something a bit different. We're going to be exploring South Carolina from A to Z. That's the title of our sister podcast, and the title tells you all you need to know about what that podcast does. Letter by letter, we go through the South Carolina Encyclopedia, giving you bite-sized takes on the history of the Palmetto State. So now we're going to expand just a little bit, and we're going to pull some of the interesting ones we've had to do where we really couldn't tell the whole story on a given topic. So a little more in-depth, South Carolina from A to Z. And among the subjects we'll be covering today, we'll find out what a royal council is and what it has to do with South Carolina's history. We'll also talk about the man who brought our favorite Christmas plant into the United States. So, Walter, we are starting today with Joel Poinsett, who people may know has lent his name to the poinsettia. But that's not everything he did.
Well, no, Alfred. This is another one of those instances where A to Z is a lot of fun, gives you a snippet of information, but there's a lot of backstory. And as the late Paul Harvey said, and now for the rest of the story.
Right. Now, let's do his years first, because he was 1779 to 1851.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, he was born during the American Revolution. Incredible career. He was educated mostly in Europe, in England and Scotland. And then as a young man, he spent 7 years just kind of traveling around. He was very good at languages. He was also very skilled at diplomacy, at least some would say. On that trip, he became friends with Napoleon I and Tsar Alexander I of Russia. He came back home during the War of 1812. He really wanted to be a military guy, but instead, he was named U.S. Trade Envoy to South America. Now, this is South America before it's really broken free from the Spanish Empire, but there's a lot of stirring going on in places like Chile and Brazil and what have you. Of course, Brazil was the Portuguese Empire, but still. The European country that had the most influence down there was trying to make headway was Great Britain. And he was deemed in correspondence as a suspicious character by British intelligence. And
he was in correspondence. They thought he was in correspondence with whom?
With the rebels.
Okay.
And he actually fomented a rebellion in Chile that was unsuccessful, was quashed, and he had to leave the area. He had tried to do one in Argentina, but couldn't get much interest. But he did actually get a rebellion started in Chile.
So he tried in more than one country.
Yes. When he couldn't make it in Argentina, he crossed the Andes and did it in Chile.
We're laughing. It's not funny. What he was doing was dead serious, but still looking back, you go, what in the world? But apparently trying to forward the aims of the United States in Latin America.
Yeah, which would eventually become part of the Monroe Doctrine. In fact, he was a friend of President Monroe, and Monroe appointed him in 1825 as the first American ambassador to Mexico, which was now an independent country.
And they let him in.
And then he started to meddle again. He just couldn't help himself.
They let him in. They should have known.
Well, the first thing he tried to do was to buy Texas. Texas was then still part of Mexico. The Mexicans were not interested in selling.
Okay.
He did get trade worked out with Mexico, interestingly enough, on the southern border. But he kept trying to stir the pot with local politics. We're not really sure what his aim was, but Mexico eventually said, U.S., you need to recall him. They requested his recall as ambassador because he meddled in local politics. Now, this is where his career kind of takes an interesting turn. He comes back home in 1830, and the state's in the midst of the nullification crisis.
Right.
You know,
which is the belief was being promulgated here, and people were signing on to it, that if a state did not like something the federal government was doing, a law that was passed, for instance, they didn't have to follow it.
They could nullify it.
They could nullify it.
And in this case, we're talking about tariffs.
Right.
So he came back home to the upcountry in Greenville, which, by the way, was a hotbed of anti-nullification activity, really pro-unionist. You know, we don't believe all those nullifiers.
Right.
And he actually became a confidential local agent for President Andrew Jackson.
Okay.
And he secretly organized unionist militias threatening, you know, if you guys go this far, we're going to fight you. Now, in the North, he was hailed as a hero. He had kind of stepped on it down here in South Carolina.
I would think.
And especially John C. Calhoun was not happy with him. But it didn't hurt his national reputation, and President Martin Van Buren named him Secretary of War. Secretary of the Army, but it was called Secretary of War.
Right.
And he was a reformer. The U.S. Army was, as one historian said, a paltry and poorly trained group of 8,000. And he raised standards, sent officers to Europe to be educated, and expanded the Army to about 13,000 people. The guy had a lot of interests, architecture, the natural world. He encouraged exploration. John C. Fremont, the trailblazer of the West.
Yes.
It was, as Secretary of War, he supported that expedition.
Okay.
His political career ended with the Van Buren administration, but he became the first president of the National Institute, and that was the forerunner of the Smithsonian Institution.
Okay.
And see, this is where, this is a guy who is multilingual. He's interested in geography. He's interested in architecture and engineering and military affairs. Kind of the perfect guy to head a multifaceted institution that would become the Smithsonian. Now, when we started out, you said we recognize him today, or recognize the name because of the Christmas decorations.
Yeah, most people would know the name of the plant. I doubt if they connect him with a guy in South Carolina history, but we've just done that, yeah.
Well, he brought the plant back with him from Mexico. And among the folks who took a shine to it and could propagate it and make it popular were the Hampton family. Right. With their house is still there in Columbia. And they had a greenhouse, and they propagated the poinsettia. It was named, I'm not exactly sure who named it for him, but it was named in his honor, and he did bring it back here for the first time. And so now when you see all of those plants by the roadside and in your local horticultural supplier, this guy from the upcountry of South Carolina is responsible for bringing it to the United States.
Well, and obviously a much wider, as you say, set of interests and ambitions, I would say. He strikes me as an ambitious person. So that is, P is for Poinsett, Joel Roberts, 1779 to 1851. And let's move on. We've got a few other people to cover today. Where do you want to go next?
Do we want to go to Lord Montague Grenville?
Sure. That is, M is for Montague, Lord Charles Greville, 1741 to 1784, governor. Now, governor before, of course, the United States of America, so governor of the colony of South Carolina.
Governor of the colony of South Carolina. And people like to talk about aristocrats in connection to South Carolina. Well, he certainly was one. His father was the third Duke of Manchester.
Mm-hmm.
So, his father's a duke, but he's the second son. So that gives him the title. He can use the title Lord, but he's not going to become the Duke of Manchester. He went to Oxford. He served in the House of Commons. He was appointed governor of South Carolina in 1766. Not a great time for somebody who is kind of hoity-toity.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
He did have, obviously political connections back home, but he arrives here just when the backcountry is recovering from all the what was going on in the French and Indian War. Gangs are lawless out there. The regulator movement is underway to try to regulate the behavior of the folks in the backcountry because the government in Charleston is ignoring what's going on.
And the regulators themselves eventually would have to be reined in.
Yes, by the moderators.
Right. Okay.
That gets too complicated to go into that story.
But again, let's talk about the backcountry just briefly. The backcountry of South Carolina would basically be anything that was not on the coastal plain.
If you go about 40 miles inland,
mm-hmm.
beyond that,
mm-hmm. That's the backcountry.
That's the backcountry.
Okay.
The regulators had arrested some of the gang that were the horse thieves and been sent to Charleston in jail. Well, when Montague gets here, one of the things that a governor can do is pardon. And he thought, well, I'll make everybody feel good. I will pardon these criminals. Well, he did. That did not make the folks in the backcountry who were trying to recover. This fancy guy comes in and he pardons the people that it took us forever to catch and send to Charleston for trial. And see, that was the thing in those days. Everything was in Charleston.
Right.
So these guys were captured, taken to Charleston. Witnesses had to go to Charleston, everybody, and they were tried in Charleston, convicted, put in jail, and Lord Montague comes in and says, I'm going to pardon these folks in jail.
It seems to me that he had little clue what was really going on in the backcountry. And, we talk about the backcountry now. It was what we think about the Wild West, around the time of the Civil War and after or just before. We think about the relative lawlessness of some of the territories there, things that were happening. That was the backcountry of South Carolina in many ways.
Well, the American frontier, it started at the Atlantic Ocean and eventually moved westward. But the old southeastern frontier of the two Carolinas and Georgia it was shoot 'em up, hang 'em.
It was a pretty hairy place to be.
It was a pretty hairy place.
Yeah.
In fact, the gangs that operated were so sophisticated, they would steal horses in South Carolina and run them back up the Great Wagon Road, which went from the Carolinas all the way up to Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. The regulators put a stop to all of that was going on. So Montague comes in and pardons these folks.
Not a way to win friends.
And that's just, the guy seemed to be born with two left feet. He was always stepping on something.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, it was said of him by somebody in South Carolina that Montague convinced several South Carolinians it was not impossible for a man to be too great a fool to be made a good governor. So, we're talking about now into 1767, 68, 69. The revolutionary pot's beginning to boil, dissatisfaction with what's going on. And again, he just can't seem to handle things. So when South Carolina joined the Non-Importation Association, which was a colonial-wide protest against the townshend duties, which put taxes on things like tea and paint and what have you, he decided, I'm going to go home for England for a while.
Sure.
So he's gone for 2 years.
Yeah.
And in the meantime, the folks in Charleston have said, okay, the governor's gone. Let's do this. There is a man in London named John Wilkes who has been put in jail by the royal authorities because he dared to criticize the speech of the king from the throne in Parliament.
Mm-hmm.
He's a hero to folks in South Carolina, and they sent 1,500 pounds sterling to help pay this guy's legal fees. Now, this is the colonial legislature doing this.
Holy mackerel.
When that news gets back in London, the colonial authorities just go bananas. And they give Montague instructions. You got to get that money and don't let the Commons House of Assembly, those folks elected by the people in South Carolina, have control over the budget anymore. We're going to let you and the Royal Council control it. When that word came to Charleston, the Commons House of Assembly was not happy. Over the years, they had won the right to basically control what the taxes raised in South Carolina went for.
Right.
And they were not about to change their mind. And because the leaders of the Commons House lived in Charleston, Montague had the brilliant idea of, what if I call a special session and we meet in Beaufort? Some of those folks from Beaufort will do what I tell them to do. And he does that. He calls a special meeting of the Commons House of Assembly to meet in Beaufort. Well, everybody's gotten the word, and so he decides, well, okay, we'll go back to Charleston. But
that's not going to work. Let's try this.
Yeah. But that particular action appears in the Declaration of Independence.
Ah.
It had happened in two colonies.
Yes.
In Massachusetts and South Carolina. The abuses listed of George III in the Declaration. Representatives had called together legislative bodies at places unusual, uncomfortable, and distant from the depository of their public records for the sole purpose of fatiguing them into compliance with his measures.
Now, the Continental Congress felt strongly about this in order to include it in the Declaration of Independence, because I'm right now reading David McCullough's biography of John Adams.
Yeah.
And right now I am in the section basically where the Declaration of Independence has been written with the help of Adams and Franklin, of course, but written by Thomas Jefferson. It has been submitted. It has been passed, but now it is being edited by the Continental Congress. And many things fell by the wayside. But this mention that you just made of this sneaky business of moving meetings of legislative bodies around in order to try to get an advantage, that stayed in.
That stayed in. And see, of course, everybody thinks, well, it happened in Massachusetts, but it also happened
here.
It happened here in South Carolina. So he's back here in 1771. He tries that move in 1772. And when the Commons House does meet in Charleston, the first thing the Commons House does is pass a motion of censure of the governor. So he says, okay, he dismisses them. He dissolves the Commons House of Assembly, calls for new elections. Well, a new assembly meets, and they reelect the guy who had been speaker of the previous assembly. So he dissolves them again. And pretty much having lost control of South Carolina, in 1773 he resigns in a huff, or as they said, he precipitously sailed for England to resign the governorship. He just never got it. I mean, so obtuse. But that doesn't end his association with South Carolina.
Oh?
Kind of a strange postscript. The revolution breaks out, and he joins the British Army, and he's sent to Charleston, which is now occupied by British soldiers.
Right.
And he recruits 500 American prisoners of war for service in a regiment in the Caribbean, the English Caribbean.
Okay.
And he's so successful at that they send him to New York to create another regiment of prisoners of war.
Right.
But by that time, the war is about over, and his unit is ordered to Nova Scotia.
Mm-hmm.
He goes with his unit there, where it's disbanded, and he dies there in Nova Scotia.
Okay, well, that is, M is for Montague Lord Charles Greville, 1741 to 1784. So where are we going now?
Well, we can either go to the Royal Council, or we have another one I've
Well, we mentioned the Royal Council a moment ago, and I mentioned that at the beginning of our podcast today. Let's talk about the Royal Council and what that means. Now, South Carolina, when it was first founded as a British colony, was in the hands of Lords Proprietors, right?
Yes.
But the Royal Council came later. By this point, we were no longer in the hands of the...
After 1720, we are.
After 1720.
The Revolution of 1719, yeah.
We are now not in the hands of the proprietors. We are a royal colony, a crown colony.
Yes. And under the Lords Proprietors, it was basically the governing body in the colony. 12 men serve as advisor to the governor, serving at the pleasure of the Lords Proprietors, which meant, given the politics of the day, it was kind of a revolving door.
Sure.
So when it comes into existence in 1720 to serve as an advisor to the governor, it also serves as a court of appeals for legal affairs and as the upper house of the legislature. You've got the Commons House, elected by the people,
right,
and now you've got a council. And throughout much of its history in the colonial period from 1720 until the late 1750s, it was the highest office that a colonial South Carolinian could hope to achieve. The men who were appointed were planters, merchants, lawyers. They were appointed because they were wealthy, they had good political connections back home, and they were willing to support English policies in general. And, of course, this period, 1720 to 1750, is really Charleston's golden age in terms of economic development. Rice, indigo, still the timber trade, deerskins, producing the richest colony in British North America.
And timber and forest products, et cetera, were a big deal.
Oh, absolutely.
Prior to indigo, et cetera.
Oh, yeah. They were among the first products. People were making money off of them.
Okay.
I mean, the little town of Kingstree is called Kingstree because tall, long-leaf pines make great masts for royal ships.
Right.
And if it were tagged, you can't cut this down for your log cabin or your indigo field. This is to be saved for His Majesty's Navy.
The King's Tree.
The King's Tree.
Okay.
So the council, as South Carolinians, tended to make things happen. During the first decades of royal rule, it became a little bit more powerful, but concentrated on local issues. And because there were a series of weak governors, they were there to kind of check. They obviously did not check Lord Montague.
Not effectively, anyway.
But he came after the council had lost its independence.
Okay.
And this was one of those silly things in history of how something that had become one of the most important colonial councils, it didn't disappear, but its influence collapsed overnight.
Really?
And again, it's because of an incompetent royal governor.
Okay.
We seem to be saddled with a lot of those.
We were.
And in this case, it was Governor William Henry Littleton. What he did, there was a member of council. Now remember, at this point, 1756, these are the leading planters, merchants, the wealthy people of South Carolina who, yes, they're going to go along with English policy, but at the same time, they have stature, they have substance. They're not really a rubber stamp. Well, the governor decides to kick William Ragg, who is one of the wealthiest planters in South Carolina, suspend him from the council because the governor, as one counselor said, would not defend the crown's prerogative as granted to the council. So Ragg protested the governor's lack of support for the royal prerogative, so the royal governor kicks the guy off the council for defending the crown.
William Ragg, and he was a wealthy man and influential up until that point.
Very influential. Kick him off the council. He was immediately elected to the Commons House of Assembly. But after this time, in 1756, people would be asked to serve, recommended for the council or asked to serve, and they'd say no. Someone like Henry Lawrence declined twice because you couldn't voice your opinion. It was a body that became disreputable, a dependent body, and so it was a disgrace to serve on the council, not an honor.
It sounds like the royal governor shot himself in the foot.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And so instead of these men of stature, what the Board of Trade, which ran the colonies, would do is appoint local bureaucrats who drew their salary from the British Crown to serve on the council. Placemen. They were called placemen.
So a false step by a royal governor and what was once a powerful political force in colonial South Carolina no longer is.
That's correct.
Okay.
That's correct.
Well, we got time for one more, I think. And I think you mentioned that you wanted to do Lowndes.
Oh, yes.
William Jones Lowndes, 1782 to 1822. And that's an eventful era to have lived.
Well, and I wanted to talk about him because people remember his father, Rawlins Lowndes, revolutionary governor and all of that. But William Lowndes, in his own right, he died a relatively young man. He was only 40 when he died. Mm-hmm. But his influence in the state and in the United States Congress was pretty impressive. Like a lot of children of wealth, he was educated in England and Charleston. His public career began in 1804. He was 22 years old, member of the General Assembly, and he quickly, because he was a good orator, had a good head on his shoulders, he became an important figure in the South Carolina House of Representatives. The so-called Great Compromise of 1808 that provided the upcountry with more equitable representation of the General Assembly, he was the co-author of that idea and that bill.
Okay.
That really helped shape the politics of South Carolina.
I was going to say that was pretty consequential.
That was pretty consequential. And in 1810, he was elected to the U.S. House of Representatives. And there he had some of his buddies in terms of politics. They were not very happy with the way a series of presidents, Jefferson and Madison, they were not happy with the way that President Madison was handling the dispute with Great Britain in 1810, 1811. And they were called war hawks. These are people like Henry Clay of Kentucky and John C. Calhoun. Well, Lowndes was right there with them. And again, because of his oratory and he knew how to work political bodies, he very quickly became influential. And he chaired any number of committees as a young member of Congress. Naval Affairs, Ways and Means,
wow.
Foreign Affairs. Of course, we know the War Hawks got their war with Great Britain.
War of 1812.
War of 1812. Didn't work out so well.
No.
But afterwards, in the wave of nationalism that swept the country, he helped author the legislation that created the Second Bank of the United States. He supported the enactment of protective tariffs, and he introduced a plan to pay off the national debt, and it was paid off by 1835.
That's rather startling.
But probably his most important contribution is with Henry Clay. He led the successful effort in the House to pass the Missouri Compromise of 1820.
Which had to do with whether or not slavery was going to be allowed in the Missouri Territory?
Well, whether Missouri could come in as a slave state. But in order to, if Missouri came in as a slave state with 2 senators, then that would give slave states an edge in the U.S. Senate.
Right.
So they came up with the idea that Maine, which was then part of Massachusetts, would become a free state. And they also drew a line across the country, the Missouri Compromise line, and said, beyond this, no more slavery.
You know, it's interesting to me, and that is an important thing he did. Again, we're talking about William Jones Lowndes, 1782 to 1822. The whole idea of slavery and where it was going to go. I've been reading John Adams, the book by David McCullough, and, looking at the very beginning of our republic. Here we are, Declaration of Independence, but the question of slavery comes up, and it was pretty well understood by the Continental Congress that in talking about becoming free of control from Great Britain, and talking about liberty as a God-given right. This flew in the face of slavery. But slavery was an institution that was so inherently part of the socioeconomic system of not just the colonies, but elsewhere in the world. The idea is if we start to deal with this now, we're going to totally logjam everything. We will never get to declare our independence for Britain, and they will continue to send troops over to force their will upon us. We will never break free. So they set it aside on the shelf. And now, of course, later on, it comes back. And the Missouri Compromise was one big step in dealing with the growth of slavery.
People forget that slavery existed in northern colonies and northern states even after the Revolution.
Sure. There wasn't a state in the Union that didn't have slavery.
Yeah, but
the question was, would it expand to new states?
Well, some people thought that slavery would die a natural death, but no. The invention of the cotton gins kind of put that to
Sure.
That and opening up the old Southwest Territory, the Cherokee and Creek and Choctaw lands in Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, and, Tennessee, even all that was settled initially by those over-the-mountain yeoman farmers from western North Carolina. And of course, it eventually developed a plantation economy, where large agricultural units that employed slave labor.
Anyway, Williams, Jones, Lowndes, and Henry Clay, and people like them, at least for the moment, they were able to forestall what eventually came in 1861.
Yeah, and you will find in Mr. McCullough's book, John Adams and Jefferson would correspond, and the Missouri Compromise, the debate over Missouri, the fire bell in the night was the phrase used, the issue of slavery. Now, to just get back to Mr. Lowndes himself, everybody in higher office recognized how good this guy was. Twice he was offered to be Secretary of War. He was offered diplomatic appointments to Russia, Turkey, and France. In 1820, he lost the speakership vote to be Speaker of the House by one vote. And back home, the General Assembly of South Carolina nominated him for president in 1820.
Okay.
1821, which would be for the 24 election. Now, this is before we have national political conventions and people got nominated by their state assemblies and what have you.
Yes.
He tactfully declined because he was a close friend of Calhoun, and he knew Calhoun had ambitions in 1824 for the 1824 campaign, which he clearly did.
But he declined it because
because of his friendship with Calhoun. And just about this time, his health begins to decline. He comes home to South Carolina, and he and his wife decide to sail to England, hoping he could regain his health. But he died and was buried at sea. He was 40 years old. The other three things we've talked about today might be better known, but an individual like Lowndes was really an extremely influential and effective individual.
Right.
And if you say Lowndes in South Carolina, they think about his daddy, Rawlins Lowndes, because he was governor. But this guy, when you talk about the Compromise of 1808 in South Carolina and the Missouri Compromise, wow.
A gifted legislator and gone too soon.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Well, thanks for doing this, Walter. It's always fun. And I will remind our listeners that South Carolina from A to Z is a podcast. Now, if you are within the greater South Carolina area, you can, of course, listen on South Carolina Public Radio. But for all of our podcast listeners, we would remind you can also find South Carolina from A to Z wherever you get your podcast. And we'd like to remind everybody that the opinions expressed on this program are not necessarily those of South Carolina Public Radio or its underwriters.
Many of the books discussed on Walter Edgar's Journal can be found as part of the Walter Edgar's Journal Book Nook section at All Good Books in Columbia, South Carolina, or may be available from your local bookstore. We'll talk again soon.